All right, good morning, everyone. For those of you I haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Jonna McEntee, and I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio Museums Association. I want to thank you for joining us for OMA's webinar, Advocacy After an Election. I'm so glad you're able to be with us. We have a great program for you, and I want to get right to it. Just a few housekeeping items first. To help eliminate any background noise while our speakers are presenting, we ask that you please keep your microphone muted and refrain from using your camera. We do have a chat box available in your settings bar. It's the little speech bubble symbol, and I want to encourage you to put any questions or comments that you have in the chat box during the session, and we'll have time to address those questions both throughout the presentation and during our Q&A time at the end of the webinar as well. This session is being recorded, and the link to that recording will be available on the OMA Workshop Resources page. I'll also put a link to that page in the chat box. There is a lot to cover today, so without any further ado, I want to introduce today's presenters. Sharing their expertise with us today is Stephen White, Vice President of External Affairs, Strategic Initiatives and Business Development at COSI, and Allie Greiwe, Director of External Affairs at COSI. I will be monitoring the chat box throughout the presentation, so please don't forget to type in your questions. But for now, I'm going to turn off my camera because I know Stephen and Allie have a lot of great information for you. So I'm going to let you both dive right in.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jonah, for this amazing opportunity to share some practices and concepts with our fellow colleagues and museums across the great state of Ohio and beyond. We're really excited to be part of this event here this morning and really appreciate your leadership at OMA and constantly being able to advocate for museums across Ohio as well as through local communities. So thank you so very much for that. And we're going to start off with some introductions here, and I'm going to share my screen. And as I'm doing that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Allie, so that way she can introduce herself and we can get started here. Allie, do you want to introduce yourself to the folks joining us today and also those joining us via recording?
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. Hopefully everyone had a nice, probably a little bit unusual Thanksgiving, but still a nice one nonetheless. So as Stephen mentioned, my name is Allie Greiwe. I am the Director of External Affairs at COSI. I've been with COSI since about early February, so quite an interesting time to transition to the COSI team, but colleagues have been great and we're really excited to share what we've been doing. I am an Ohio native, but before that, I was in Chicago for about 5 years. I'm working in the private sector and have a little bit more of a national security background mixed with public affairs. But again, excited to be on the COSI team and share what we have today. So Stephen, back to you.
Thanks so much, Allie. And a little bit about my background. I actually met Allie in the U.S. Senate when I was in the U.S. Senate as well. I've been at COSI now for about 2.5 years, and I oversee areas around strategic initiatives, business development, and external affairs. And before that, I spent about 10 years in DC, and then before that, doing work in the public policy realm. When I served in the U.S. Senate, I served as general counsel, handling a variety of different issues across various different topics like workforce development, and even big challenges like combating the opioid crisis here throughout our state. And then I also served as the director in Central Ohio, also in the U.S. Senate. Before that, I got my law degree at The Ohio State University and my master's of public policy as well as from The Ohio State University. And I also teach at Ohio State currently, teaching nonprofit law and leadership. So excited to be here today. As Allie mentioned, I want to echo her and in her comments that I hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving, even during these difficult times. We are all in this together, and that's going to be a common line that you hear consistently here today, that we're in it together. And in museums as an industry, even though these are very difficult times, we will emerge even stronger than before. So without further ado, we'd like to get started. The topic of our discussion here today is advocacy after an election. And one of the things that we're going to be highlighting is the critical roles of museums, not only during COVID, but then also beyond COVID, and some strategies that you can really kind of use in your advocacy as it relates to interacting with your leaders, both at the local, state, and national level. So before we begin, this is going to be our agenda for today. We're going to talk a little bit about some opportunities that you have throughout your community and beyond. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some key practices. And we refer to that as the practice of the 4 Ps that we're going to share with you today. And then we're going to illustrate 2 case studies that essentially exemplify how those practices are done through different initiatives that we are doing here at COSI, but hopefully that you could take away and say, wow, okay, that's a unique way to apply that particular tactic and strategy as we work with our elected leaders and our officials. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Before we do that, I want to make sure everyone's familiar a little bit with COSI. We are the Center of Science and Industry. We are a museum that has a statewide impact, but we're headquartered in Columbus, Ohio. This is our building. It's actually closed right now, like many other museums. We were scheduled to reopen on November 20th, but unfortunately, because of the surge of the pandemic, we behooved that it was, important from a safety standpoint for not only our guests, the community, but then also our internal team to delay that reopening. But we like to say that even though our physical doors are closed, our community doors are wide open. And you're going to see that through the 2 case studies that Allie and I share with you here in a moment. This is our vision and mission. So this is why COSI exists. Our vision, this is our why. Why do we exist? Is to engage, inspire, and transform lives and communities. And our mission, what is it that we're here to do, is to be the best partner in science, technology, and industry learning. And the key word there is partnership. And you're going to hear that phrase over and over and over again throughout this presentation. We were honored to be voted as the #1 science museum in the nation right before the pandemic hit. So literally like 2 weeks before the state of Ohio had the shutdown as a result of the pandemic last March. It was something that we were honored to have. We're still honored to have that. And again, we utilize that in our community engagement to be able to say, okay, even though our physical doors are closed, we want to continue to serve the public in a variety of different ways and to really live up to that. And so we've done a number of different initiatives in the community to help continue that critical work, engaging, inspiring, and transforming. COSI impacts about 1.2 million Ohioans a year, and this is our statewide impact across Ohio's 88 counties. So again, something that we're honored to do to really get at that industry learning around science and technology across Ohio. So we're going to start today by talking a little bit. This is after an election. We just had an election a couple of weeks ago. Things have changed. Some big things have changed at the national level, and then some smaller things have changed at the state level. So we're going to talk a little bit about some upcoming opportunities, and that's really going to be our baseline of what we're going to be talking about here today. Because when you have a new election, as to what we just went through, there's a unique window of opportunity to be able to engage your elected officials and your public officials and your leaders in your community during this, what we call the lame duck session of before the new administration takes foot. The reason that is critically important is because agendas are being constructed right now as we speak here today, laying out the framework for how these individuals, whether it be at the local, state, or national level, decide how he or she is going to govern, decide how he or she is going to be able to fulfill his or her new role as an elected official. And so it may seem a little bit early, we're talking November here. Why, gosh, we're talking, some of you might be saying, we're not even to the first of the year, but actually right now is the perfect opportunity to be able to make those phone calls, to be able to create those Zoom meetings and doing that outreach before they even take office for those individuals who are new. For those individuals that have been voted back into office again, even better, right? Another opportunity because they're crafting what's their next level of opportunity for how they can serve the public. And they're also formulating those strategies as we speak. So right now is a perfect window for you to be able to engage, and we encourage you to do that across multiple different channels. I'm going to turn over to Allie to talk about two of those different opportunities.
Sure. So again, as Stephen mentioned, we're just post an election here in Ohio, and we have a lot of the different levels of the local, state, and federal. And I really want to talk about the local and state levels here today. Stephen mentioned he talked a little bit about some of the opportunities we'll discuss today, and later we'll talk about the Science Festival, and I'll allude back to this. But some of our key partners are really the mayors in each of the cities, especially here in Central Ohio, and the county commissioners, of which there are 3 in each county. So we found that the mayors and county commissioners are big advocates of the agenda of not just COSI, but museums and the role they play in education, especially in the COVID era. Also, key partners for us are those at the state level. So we've really engaged over the past couple of months with the General Assembly, so the House and Senate. They've also been key advocates and really looking for ways that together we can serve the community across Ohio, and not just in Central Ohio, but through different pockets of the state, which we'll talk about again in a second. So we also have the federal level. And for that, I will turn it back over to Stephen to talk a little bit about what we've been doing at the federal level.
Thanks so much, Allie. And for those of you who are interested in partnering with the your local mayors and county commissioners, we recommend 2 resources for you. One is the Ohio Mayors Alliance, which represents a number of different mayors across Ohio. It's a trade association that represents mayors across our community. The other one is the County Commissioners Association of Ohio. That's, again, you could just Google both these different organizations and all their contact information will come up. But as Allie mentioned, you have 3 county commissioners in each of Ohio's 88 counties. And that association is, in essence, represents all of those county commissioners across Ohio. One of the things that, as we think about local communities, those individuals are closest to the ground, right? They're the ones that are the most nimble, are most responsive to those local issues that you're seeing play out, as are your state representatives. Here you see the House district map and the Senate district map. Both of these, by the way, are available through the Ohio Secretary of State's office. So we encourage you to check out Secretary Frank LaRose's website, where not only you have these maps, but then also if you want to do a deeper dive, both the Ohio House and the Ohio Senate have their own respective sites as well. And those sites have specific maps where you can type in your zip code or type in your city or type in your county, and it will zoom in to your particular district, and it will tell you who your district members are. We encourage you to find those members and to reach out to them and to start building those relationships and start to build those conversations with those officials at the local level. If you have not done that already, again, perfect opportunity to do that right after the election has occurred. But as Allie mentioned, as we talk about the state level, advocacy is really important. One of the things we had the opportunity of doing back in April of just this past year was advocating on behalf of Ohio museums at the House 2020 Recovery Task Force, and specifically sharing with those members in the General Assembly, the Ohio General Assembly, those House and Senate members, and speaking to the thousands of jobs that are associated with the museum industry, but then also the critical role that the economic impact that Ohio museums have on our state. And the other thing that we communicated to them was the critical role that museums play around what we call an essential human service, and that is learning. Learning doesn't stop because of a pandemic. And museums are particularly situated to be able to impact learning, particularly distance learning, in the middle of a pandemic. That was our message to the General Assembly. And so we urge each of you to reach out to those House and Senate members to share your story, of your impact that your museum has on your local community, so that way they're aware of those particular powerful statistics and numbers and stories that you have on a daily basis. So we also have some national opportunities before us. Right, this is your U.S. congressional map in the state of Ohio. One of the things that we recognize is that there's a new leader in town in the White House with President-elect Biden. And because of that, the administration is crafting its agenda. And right now he is in the process of building his cabinet with his Vice President Harris. And they're having those conversations right now at the national level. One of the other things that Congress is discussing at the moment is what's called CARES Act 2.0. Being able to take the successful passage of legislation in the CARES Act that was passed earlier this year and doing another round of that, particularly maybe even during the lame duck session. We're not entirely sure if a lame duck CARES Act is going to pass between now and between when President-elect Biden becomes president, but we are very confident that a CARES Act 2.0 will pass the US Congress. And so as you look at engaging your local leaders, your state leaders, and also your federal leaders, we encourage you to reach out to your members of Congress in addition to those folks to talk a little bit about the critical roles that museums play in your own community and the role that you play in your community as they consider a CARES Act 2.0, which again, we're very, very confident at a very high confidence level. And I can say that with 10 years of experience in the US Senate as a staffer, that this will pass, if not during the lame duck session, the beginning of next year. So encourage you to start that outreach right now and not wait until the first of the year. So with that, we're going to share with you 4 what we call key practices that we encourage you to utilize as you have these conversations with your elected leaders. But before I do that, I'd be remiss if I did not let Allie. Allie also has significant experience in the U.S. Senate. Allie, anything you want to add to the federal level than what I shared that you think it's important for our fellow colleague museums to know about before we move on?
And again, this was just when I started, so it was an interesting time to come into this space and have, everything change. But one of the things that was really cool that we did is we worked with IMLS to really craft advocacy on the role that museums can play. So we worked closely with Senator Portman and Senator Brown's office to really advocate at the national level of how the role that museums are into what was CARES 1.0. So continuing that, we are, hopefully mimicking the same strategy into CARES 2.0. But it's really something to say that it's not just the local and state federal that we're talking about, but really taking the practice of what we're doing here in Ohio and applying it to the federal level so other states can see what we've been doing in Ohio, especially around distance learning and the role we have to play. So that's something that, we're in our backyard and we're trying to do so much, but Ohio and all the great museums across have really great examples to really advocate, not just here in our backyard, but on a national scale as well. Sorry, back over to you, Stephen.
Allie, did I lose you? I think I may have lost you there. I apologize. Am I back?
Can you hear me now?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry. I think you froze too. So I'll turn it back over to you. That's all I had.
Sorry about that. Technology, right? You gotta love it. And I would be remiss if I did not again thank Jonah and the leadership of the Ohio Museum Association. One of the things that we did really effectively for CARES 1.0 was reaching out to all the museums across Ohio to speak with one voice when it comes to the Ohio congressional delegation. And so one of the things we're excited about is continue to work with OMA and our fellow museums across Ohio to speak with that one voice. So the question you might be asking is, what are some strategies? What are some techniques that each of us can develop to have effective advocacy, whether it be at the local level, the state level, or the federal level that we just talked about? So we want to share with you 4 key practices. And one of the things that we look at is we look at what's the common thread between all 3 of those different levels. And out of that, we develop what's called the concept of the practice of the 4 Ps. And the first one is around priorities. and we'll talk more about that here in a moment. Priorities, specifically the priorities of your community. The power of partnerships and being able to advocate effectively. Personalization in the stories that you sell, that you talk about, right? That you essentially you have to be able to share your story in a way that is not just about data and figures, but it's speaking to the lives that are impacted from your critical work. And then the final piece that we want to talk a little bit about is that powerful content. That powerful content. So again, it's not just about, hey, I'm just going to share specific stories, but what's the data that comes out of that as well. So let's speak to that one-on-one. First, around priorities. So what do we mean when we talk about priorities? Well, priorities is not necessarily about your own priorities of your own institution, but instead it's about thinking about the priorities and rallying around the priorities of your community that relate to the challenges that you see, both now and in the long term, but then leveraging the power of data to inform your decision makings. So when you look at your broader community, what are the things that your communities are struggling with? And then how can you position your organization to look at those priorities and say, wow, I as a museum or as a community anchor can help solve those problems and solve those issues associated that you're seeing play out in the community. So leveraging the power of priorities to be able to position how you speak to the issues. So when you go to your mayor or your county commissioner or your state and local representatives, you're not just talking about your own organization. That's important. You absolutely have to do that. But you're doing it in a way that says, my organization is not only, here's why my organization is important. My organization is important because I'm helping to serve the greater good of my community around these critical issues that our constituents and that our residents are facing. And so as we shared back during the slide I shared earlier with the members of the House Task Force, it wasn't about, we weren't talking about COSI during that discussion. We were talking about the challenges that the state was having around COVID and how museums were uniquely suited to be able to solve those challenges or those priorities. So that's the first P. Think about priorities of your own community as you're going into your advocacy. The second P, it's all about partnerships. This is something that's near and dear to my heart and COSI's heart because it's part of our DNA. Remember, I shared that vision and mission statement earlier, being the best partner in science, technology, and industry learning. It's what we do. And you're going to see that through the case studies that Allie and I share with you here in a moment. So partnerships, when you're going into advocacy, it's better to come in with a partnership as opposed to coming alone. So identifying and working collaboratively with critical stakeholders in your community who share your vision and mission. So this is really critically important. It's not just other museums. It's your local foundation. It's your private companies that you partner with as you're delivering that message on behalf of your organization. But then also it's looking at maybe those relationships and those partnerships are the elected officials themselves. So not just thinking about it as, hey, I'm as an organization going to come in with a phalanx of partners, but you, member, leader of the community, are our partner as well, and viewing it through that lens. So again, that second P, don't underestimate the power of partnerships in your advocacy. The third P, personalization, right? You're not just about selling things in your organization. It's about talking about the impact that your organization generates in the people and the lives that it serves. So when you're advocating, we encourage you to develop that story that is impactful to the individual, that communicates that message in a very powerful way. We're talking real people, real lives, stories that invoke a passion to engage, stories that identify a community need, and experiences should engage directly, and those relationships are critical. So relationships. One of the things that I did not share in the previous two P's, but they're critically important, is that when you're identifying those priorities as your first P, relationships are critical because, again, it's not just about you looking out into the world, but leveraging your relationships to help inform you of what those priorities are. Again, very similar with the partnerships. You have to have those relationships in order to generate those partnerships. And sometimes it doesn't happen overnight, right? It takes time to build quality partnerships, and relationships are critical to that development. The same with personalization. Being able to share those powerful stories, those relationships enable you to do that. So you're going to see that common thread of relationships. Some that are short-term in nature, but others, and we encourage it to be long-term relationships that you can then harness the collective power of those relationships to amplify the power of these 4 Ps. So the fourth and final one, power content. So it's not enough just to be able to share those powerful stories that I mentioned earlier, that storytelling, but you have to have the data behind it. So as you look at that final P, the data associated with that, collect that data. Content is king and queen. Deliver critical information in an easily understood manner. So you don't want to go into an advocacy meeting with your local leader and just throw an encyclopedia of content, but extrapolate what are those most powerful data points that you want that individual to leave with. If they could know just 1 or 2 things after you leave that meeting, what are those 1 or 2 data points that you want to convey to them around what you're doing to deliver and serve your community? Again, identify that problem you're trying to solve. That first P, what are those priorities? Easily digestible information in visual. You want to make sure that that content that you leave behind with them is visually appealing. It's not just a Word document with bullets, right? Data, it needs to be relevant, it should be recent, and it should be very reliable. Again, the few, the better, right? Not overloading them with information, because you may, in some cases, particularly at the federal level, you may only have one bite at the apple where those individuals are getting flooded with all different kinds of different organizations from all different kinds of industries. And again, relationships are critical. So being able to establish those relationships with those individuals that can generate that content on your behalf or help you generate that content is preferable. So those are the practice of the 4 Ps. So if you leave this Zoom meeting here today, we encourage you to really practice those 4 Ps in your advocacy. So now Allie and I would like to demonstrate 2 case studies of what COSI is currently doing right now that essentially utilize those practices of the 4 Ps. And we'll share with that here, and then we'll open it up to questions you might have. So first, let's talk a little bit about this thing called the Science Festival that Allie alluded to earlier. What is the Science Festival, the COSI Science Festival? Well, one of the things we did is we said, okay, well, let's look at the priorities of our community, or in this case, in the state of Ohio. One of the things that we saw in the data as we looked at the landscape across Ohio was this idea of the skills gap. This notion that right now there are jobs that are open in the state of Ohio, even though we have very, very high unemployment rates. So in some cases, you would have over 200,000 jobs that were open in our state and 150,000 individuals that were unemployed. So the question is, how do you bridge that skills gap? How do you give those individuals who are unemployed the skills necessary to be able to get those jobs? Because the employers were looking to hire, and they're still looking to hire today, but they could not find the talent. And so again, how do you bridge that skills gap? We submit to you that looking at the data, we saw that over 50% of those open jobs were in the STEM-related career paths. So the question that we had to address was, what's an initiative that we could execute that could help with that issue of science literacy? This notion of, if you can get more people comfortable around science, comfortable around technology, then they can say, wow, I can do that. And therefore, they would want to go into the pipeline of STEM-related fields to help bridge that skills gap. So the purpose of the Science Festival was to improve science literacy to help bridge that STEM workforce, support economic development in Ohio, because that's what jobs do, expose people to science and technology where they live, learn, and lounge. So the Science Festival is a 4-day event that happens every single May. Started 2 years ago. And what we do is, the idea was that you immerse communities across Ohio with STEM events. And so the idea was that if you could bring science to them in their own community, at churches and community centers and parks, then you're bringing it to them at their level, at their comfort level, to be able to make them more comfortable around science. They want to go into that skills gap, address that priority issue of addressing those skills gaps. That's what the Science Festival is. But we knew we could not do it without partnerships. And so what we decided to do was to engage mayors directly in saying, okay, COSI does not want to come into a community and say, okay, these are the priorities of that community, but rather let's go to the mayors of those communities and say, will you partner with us? You tell us what are the priorities of your community, where we should be going during this 4-day festival. Is it the local church? Is it the local community center? Is it a place of business? What are those places of business? You know, they're in the best position to know that, so let's partner with them. So we brought them all together. What you're seeing here is an image of all those mayors. We did a fun science experiment where we kicked it off, and we had them mix. Those are the mayors of Gahanna, Bexley, Reynoldsburg, and Grove City, some cities throughout Ohio. And then what we said is, we're going to take that partnership level to the next level. And we're not just going to keep it locally, but we're going to create partnerships at the state level with state government and with the federal government as well. So institutions like NASA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Ohio Department of Higher Education, the Ohio Department of Agriculture. And so what you're seeing there on that map are all those events that populated over the span of those 4 days. Each one of those different events were created in conjunction with a partner. In some cases, it was the mayor. In some cases, it was the state government. In some cases, it was the federal government. And so again, we harness the power of those partnerships to do that. Personalization. Again, this idea of sharing powerful stories about what you're doing that could impact public policy. So what we decided to do there is say, okay, let's pick stories of individuals in their own community, and let's give them a name. We're going to call them STEM stars. But COSI is not going to pick them. We're going to ask the mayors of the communities to pick their STEM stars in those communities, and they, in essence, will be the grand marshals of the COSI Science Festival. So we went to those mayors and said, okay, mayor, we're not going to pick. You all find someone in your community, and it could be a kid, a parent, a business leader, regardless of their background, all different shapes and sizes. You select who those individuals are, and we're going to lift up their story, and we're going to share their story to the broader community. And so we did that. And these were the STEM stars of the first year of the COSI Science Festival. And I want to highlight one story in particular. We went to the mayor of New Albany, and we asked him, who in your community could be a STEM star? Who could be a grand marshal? So we could share that powerful story, so other people can say, wow, if that person can do it, then I can do it. And they picked a gentleman by the name of Aaron Westbrook. Aaron was born without the half of his right arm. And what did he decide to do when he was in high school? He said, I'm going to create my own prosthetic using 3D printing technology. And I'm not only going to create that for myself, but I'm going to create it for other individuals in the community as well, who are similar, who are like me. And so we lifted his story up, and we shared his story across the community, across the region, across the state. And guess what happened? People found out about it. Individuals found out about it. Leaders found out about it. And our own Lieutenant Governor John Husted heard about this story and went to Aaron Westbrook and said, Aaron, this story is powerful. How can we help? And Aaron said, well, there is unfortunately regulatory tape that prevents me at being able to produce these prosthetics at a high capacity, even though people need them and want them. And so the lieutenant governor heard this story through the science festival and introduced legislation with that General Assembly to help eliminate some of that red tape. So again, taking the power of those P's, the personalization of those stories, can really help you move the needle on a particular, in this case, it was not anticipated, it was unanticipated. But again, helping you with that public policy engagement. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Allie to talk about what we did just this past year, again, embracing the power of those 4 Ps. Allie?
Sure. And the COSI Science Festival is an annual festival. So a lot of what Stephen was talking about was in 2019 was the first year of the festival. That was from the pictures you can see, obviously physical. This year, it was a bit different. So we transitioned to a digital festival. And we're excited to share some of the results and impact from that because, everyone had to kind of change plans or readjust. And we did so on a very short timeline, but our impact was great because of the power content we have. So the snapshot of what we had regarding that power content looked like this. So Stephen talked about earlier about all the levels of partnerships we had. We did the same thing, even though it was digital. So we partnered with people like NASA, with ODNR, with the local mayors to do events to pull off the largest STEM event in Ohio's history. So we were able to work with the governor's office again. We have so every year. In one of his COVID press conferences, he advertised the COSI Digital Festival for formal, informal educators, parents at home just looking for activities to do with their kids. And we even partnered with First Lady Fran DeWine to advertise her sidewalk chalk experiment she can do using materials you can find in your kitchen cabinet. And we also partnered with, again, NASA, and we had the administrator, Jim Bridenstine, tag along too to do an interview here with on the right. Here's Dr. Frederick Bertley, our CEO. Hopefully you've all had a chance to meet him. If not, he's great. And they had a very engaging conversation on the future, the mission of NASA and the Artemis mission, looking to get the next generation to Mars. Here we also have the Undersecretary of the Department of Energy. Actually this year in the works before we went digital, we were planning for half of the US national labs to actually come to COSI to do our physical festival. But DOE said, even though it's digital, we still really want to be engaged and talk about how do we demystify a little bit what is a national lab and what can you do in the energy sector to really reach the early pipeline to excite people about the careers in energy. Again, really talking about the power content that came out of this. We're excited to share some of the results here. So I'll just give everyone a second to digest this. This is our impact report. We still were able to work with local STEM stars to do ceremonies to honor their work in the communities. We were featured in the governor's press conference. Look at the number of people we reached, over 100,000 people we reached in all different corners, not only in Ohio, but across different states as well. So we had 39 digital events, and this year we are going to do the festival again. It'll be digital, and that'll be the first weekend of May, and we're looking to increase that number. So we're really excited that even though the event went digital, it was still just as engaging for people at home during a very tough time, not only for the power of science literacy to make it accessible and engaging, but really to help with kind of the emotional and social concerns that a lot of caregivers, parents, teachers alike have going on, how to really engage youth in science literacy and make it just as engaging from the comfort of their home. So Stephen, with that, I'll turn it back over to you to talk about our next case study.
Yeah, so we're excited about the next case study to share with you again, how leveraging the power of these 4 Ps here, practicing the 4 Ps with our case study number 2. And this one is a little bit more directly related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And as you listen to this case study, we're going to give you an ask at the end of this case study, which is to join us, to partner with us. And so as you listen to it, we're going to take questions on the back end, but then we're going to give you that ask. That big ask is to join us together, because again, we believe rising tides lift all boats, and we want to be able to support other museums across Ohio to promote you in your own backyard in any way that we can, because we're all in it together. So case study number 2. This is an initiative that we're currently executing right now around distance learning. It's an innovative partnership that we've actually partnered with other museums, food banks, other entities around Ohio. But again, it started out with looking at the priorities, not COSI's priorities, but the priorities of Ohio and of the community, and viewing it through that lens and saying, okay, we know that these are the priorities, the challenges and opportunities that our community is facing. How can COSI be ready to serve? How can we do that? So we looked at the data, we looked at those priorities, a few of them, including coming from McKinsey and Company. This was back in, COSI we closed our doors in March. These were studies that were coming out in April, looking at the impact of the school system across not only Ohio and the nation, but across the globe. And we have an education stakeholder advisory council of thousands and thousands of teachers across Ohio. And so we were getting feedback on a daily basis, and still do today, around challenges associated with distance learning, going from this type of environment to this type of at-home environment, and the challenges associated with that. So we knew that we had to step up and serve the community through these priorities. We did so in 3 ways. One was on the digital side that Allie will talk about here momentarily, the physical side, which I'll speak to in a moment, and then the partnership model, right? Again, another powerful one of those P's, right? All about partnerships. We're all in it together. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Allie to talk a little bit more about the digital implementation of that.
Sure. So, all of us on this call here have done some form of digital engagement, transitioning what we have, usually our community in-person offerings, online. And our version of that, born out of the pandemic, is what is called COSI Connects. It's available every day of the year, and activity is posted, and it'll be available long after the pandemic. So this isn't just a solution we have for the pandemic, but for long after. If you do a quick Google of COSI Connects, this is what it looks like. Again, we have an activity posted a day. Here at COSI, like many of us on the call, have an internal education team, but we also utilize our external partners to create content like this. So we have videos, podcasts, science challenges, citizen science challenges to really engage people at home, utilizing activities they can find at home in their kitchen cabinet. So you can see on the left an activities posted a day. You can filter by subject, you can filter by age range, all kind of hands-on activities you can still do at home. One of the features we have on COSI Connects is the teach back method. This is in partnership with Can't Stop Columbus. So we're encouraging those consuming the COSI Connects content to teach it back to their mentor or caregiver by having that mentor or caregiver record them teaching back the content to not only support learning retention and them to really show how they can regurgitate the material, but also it's another great evaluation tool for us to see on social media how people are using the content. So again, harnessing that data. We still partnered with the governor and First Lady Fran DeWine to make sure we can advertise the Imagination Library program going on. So children aged 0 to 5 can sign up for a free library book wherever they are, regardless of situation or where they are in the state. So again, really making it holistic content that STEM is about, engaging in literacy. It's about engaging in all forms of science and how STEM impacts your daily life. Another great feature we have on COSI Connects, big hit among teachers especially, is our virtual field trip. So I myself remember going to COSI as a kid, exploring in person, but you can still do it online, and even an even more interactive way to really consume the material at your own pace at home. So this is available online. It's our dinosaur gallery. It's really great, really fun. I encourage you to check it out. But again, we really want to emphasize the priorities here. And I already saw Sarah had a question in the chat about what's really relevant right now. That's a great question and a great segue into the digital desert and the digital divide. So we knew that the digital aspect is, we're all going digital, but what does it really mean? And what are the challenges still facing people at home who are consuming our content? Not just making the content, but for people consuming the content. So again, we use the data from our community to see that the digital divide is really broken down into 3 distinct problems. So it's about lack of infrastructure, digital literacy, so people's ability to really critically consume the content online, then of course access to broadband. So we went about to trying to tackle some of these problems together. So here's a snapshot of Ohio. The dark purple are counties where 30% or more of homes struggle with access to broadband. So really an issue affecting the southeast portion of the state, but it's not just a rural problem. It's here in our own backyard of Columbus. We have pockets that are really suffering from access to broadband. So what we did is we again looked at the data to see infrastructure. Even though people may not have access to broadband, what is their infrastructure like? Well, of households making 30,000 or less, we still found that over 90% have access to smartphones. So what we did is we really met people where they were. We took all that into consideration to create a mobile app. And again, COSI Connects is free, and this app is free as well. Here's a snapshot of what it looks like. Everything from that web platform you can find on the mobile app. The most exciting feature about this app is that it can be utilized offline. So if someone lacks access to broadband at home, they can go to a mobile hotspot or community hotspot, hit that weekly download button, and they have a week's worth of COSI Connects content they can do from the comfort of their home, even if they don't have access to Wi-Fi. So again, really harnessing the issue of broadband, making sure that digital literacy is still going on at home. And we really couldn't pull COSI Connects off without the power of partnerships, which we'll continue to talk about in this case study. We initially partnered with the Ohio After School Network to make sure the community really knew where their Wi-Fi hotspots were, not just the intuitive ones like schools or libraries, but where they are all around you, including the mobile hotspots as well. So again, really great, and really relied on our network of partnerships to do this, to do the digital side and the physical side, which is a great transition to Stephen to talk about our learning lunchboxes.
Thanks so much, Allie. So one of the things we knew was that it wasn't enough just to have the digital website and the mobile app available, because there were still some pockets of our community who didn't even have access to that. So how could you serve those individuals? And so that was the creation of the Learning Lunchbox program. We did a pilot in June where we took all that great COSI Connects content that was online, and we put it into a box. And you know, it was this is kind of what it looked like. It was a bag at the moment, and we said, okay, how are we going to get this out? So what we did is we knew we wanted to serve the most vulnerable and underserved individuals in our community. So we partnered with the Children's Hunger Alliance. And so these the idea was simple: you feed their hungry lives and you feed their hungry minds at the same time. So these kids and their family would pick up their food. Again, these personalizations, these powerful stories that we heard, these kids would pick up their food, in some cases, not even having access to shelter, let alone school, right? So how could you serve them? And so every week they would pick up their food, and they would also get the STEM kit with 5 days of activities. And it was a huge success. You know, kids, they were opening up these kits. It was like Christmas morning. So we knew that we had to continue to do this. So that gave birth to the official COSI Learning Lunchbox. This is what it looks like. We started delivering these to the communities in July. And you know, it has a great stuff inside these boxes. What's in the box, you might ask? Well, it's got a week's worth of science content, about 10 hours of content that are geared for grades K through 8. We include everything in the box because we presume that these kids do not have access to anything. So everything from batteries to binoculars are included, and even writing utensils that they may want to have, and coloring utensils because they may not have access to pens. We include seed packets as well, so they could create their own have their own food in their backyard and have that if they would like that. But then it's also addressing that digital divide that Allie mentioned earlier. So inside each box, we have what's called the gamification of digital literacy. So again, it's not enough, the data tells us, it's not enough just to give them Chromebooks and Wi-Fi. You have to be able to explain how you can use those those assets in a really productive way. So we gamify it, make it fun. But then everything in the box is aligned directly with the Ohio Department of Education and their remote learning guidelines, as well as the Ohio Learning Standards and the Next Generation Science Standards. So each parent and caregiver and or school, free and reduced lunch, get access to these great contents that are back mapped directly to those learning standards. So for example, this is our space box, and you can see here, all these are directly related to those learning standards. If they want to learn more, Well, they can get access to those great COSI Connects content. We link it back to the digital platform as well, that's available for free. But again, partnerships, right? Could not be possible without great partners, some of which you see on the screen here, that allow us to expand into different themes. So we have different themed boxes now that we've created. For example, the water box in partnership with ODNR, the Ohio Department of Ag. Just a few snapshots of some of the activities that go inside of that box. The nature box, which again, great partnership with ODNR and the Department of Agriculture, everything from bird watching to biomimicry to animal hide and seek that are included inside that box. Our space box with NASA, really incredible stuff around being able to create your own moon base or your own impact crater as an example of that. Just a quick snapshot of what that box looks like, some of the assets inside the space box. And right now we're building the energy box with the U.S. Department of Energy. And we even had the privilege of hosting the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Energy here at COSI back at the end of July. In all, we have 8 different themed kits right now, learning lunchboxes, 5 of them which are currently available or being distributed out to the community. We are right now doing a statewide deployment of these learning lunchboxes and producing about 1,000 of these kits per week that are going to food banks. They're going to foster homes. They're going to moms who are overcoming recovery from addiction. They're going to schools at free and reduced lunches. They're all being done in a socially distant manner where cars pull up. They go in their trunks. Just a snapshot of some of the demand that we see at some of these different locations. This is an example of our stop in Dayton in partnership with the Boonshaft Museum. And so you could see there just incredible feedback, 1,000 people showing up for 200 learning lunchboxes. We also partner with the Mayor's Alliance, as well as the County Commissioners Association, 2 organizations I mentioned earlier. And these are just an example of our mayors who serve as volunteers for the distribution of the learning lunchboxes, as well as the county commissioners. Members of the General Assembly also serving as volunteers.
Eastern Ohio, we have a problem with
that. There is State Representative Sarah talking about the importance of the priorities of Southeast Ohio, of the digital gap and distance learning. Mayor Berger to the left there up in Lima. And then we also partner with our great museums across Ohio right now. So you can see here a snapshot of other museums. So when we go out to a community and we distribute these learning lunchboxes, inside of each box, we promote the museums of the local community. So, because we know some folks in Lima might not be able to go to COSI, but they can go to the Imagination Station or the other museum in their own backyard. So what we do is we include materials inside of each of these learning lunchboxes that promote and highlight the museums of that particular community. And so power content, right? Being able to deliver that content in a powerful way across Ohio that we're going to be delivering across Ohio's 88 counties. Just a quick snapshot of some of the media from across Ohio. Again, learning lunchboxes, gamification of digital literacy, distributing broadband along the way. Our ask before we open it up to questions here is we would love to support you and partner with you as we wrap up this presentation. If you're interested in partnering with us for the Learning Lunchbox program, please reach out to Allie or myself. We will include your materials we will handle the costs associated with that. We just want to promote your museums in your community as we go out to do this across Ohio. And as we end and we open up to questions here for the last several minutes, 10 minutes or so, again, the practice the 4 Ps. What are those priorities in your community? Leverage those partnerships, the personalization of those stories, and powerful content of data to show that you can impact in a very significant way, because we know we're all in this together and we will get through it even stronger than before. And we're all here to help each other out. And Allie and I would be happy to take any questions you might have, and I'll turn it back over to Jonah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Allie and Stephen. That was fabulous information. And just a reminder to everyone that if you do have questions, please feel free to type those into the chat box. I know we have one more that we need to answer that's currently in there. But while everyone is thinking about those questions, I just wanted to reiterate what I thought were some really important takeaways. Like you were saying, Stephen, at the end there, the priorities, partnerships, personalization, and power content, something always to remember while you're doing your advocacy. And I think a really important takeaway from what you two were talking about with your case studies with both the Science Fest and the Learning Lunchboxes is you're identifying the needs of the community and focusing on what your museum can do to impact that need. You're reaching out to state and local leaders. And that leads to not only the buy-in for that initiative, but it's also advocacy with a small a. You're showing your organization's value to those elected officials so that when the time comes for an ask or when the museum has a need in the future, that history of partnership and collaboration and the impact of your organization is already known and demonstrated to those elected officials. So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, as we do our day-to-day work, not even our quote unquote advocacy work, but our day-to-day work of the organization. All of those initiatives and all of the programs that we do, those are advocacy opportunities when you reach out and have those partnerships with your elected officials. So I think that's fabulous takeaways from those initiatives. I know, Allie, you talked a little bit to Sarah's question regarding priorities, some examples of things that our communities need right now during the pandemic that museums can help with. In addition to the digital divide, were there any other examples that came to mind, just to kind of put a button on that question there?
We talked about digital literacy and the digital divide, but really overall, we're pitching that education is an essential service. So in COVID, there's a lot of, rightly so, attention on providing access to food, to shelter, to medical care. But we also say you can't understate the importance of education and that museums have just as big of an impact of a role to play, especially in informal education. So after school programs are really struggling right now. Parents are really looking for access to what they can do to not only keep the boat moving on what they're learning and not going into, another summer slide or anything like that, but also how do they keep their kids emotionally and socially engaged when they don't have access to their typical classmates? So what are things they can do, that makes them feel part of a community, that gets their interest in science learning? Really promoting that spark to, again, go back to promoting really an interest in what a career in STEM might look like, which might seem silly to talk about for a first grader, but it's absolutely vitally important. And really grades 1 to 3 is really where we're trying to target, to have these hands-on activities. That's COSI's bread and butter, is hands-on. And we know that's critically important for getting people to really engage or really have an interest in science. So we're trying to do that in a way educationally that is in a fun way, that's not promoting the screen fatigue. So when we talk about digital, a lot of teachers are saying we just have enough. We're struggling to do our average standard lesson plan. We're saying this gives you a break. This is what we can do to complement activities. You don't have to do any extra work. We've done the work of back mapping to your standards. We've done the work to really seamlessly fit this into your lesson plan or your after school program.
Excellent. And a follow up to that, Sarah asks, has your organization created distance learning opportunities that are accessible for individuals with special needs specifically?
Yeah, so that's something that we're looking at right now as we speak, and not only around special needs, but then also different languages, right? Because we know that there are certain students who their first language is not English. So what we're looking at now, particularly on that, we've done that with our COSI Connects digital platform, providing some areas where you can have those with special needs can get access to additional resources through COSI Connects on the digital side. But we also want to execute that as it relates to these physical learning lunchboxes as well. So we've started those conversations with a few organizations around Ohio. Really great point.
And adding to kind of what Stephen said, we are partnering with foster homes. So we're categorizing special needs in a variety of ways. So kids who are coping with trauma, the Franklin County Children's Service has said We can't bring in outside materials due to COVID. Your lunch boxes are critical in helping kids with their trauma and giving them something to do. If a parent for some reason can't make it to the visitation, it gives them something to do instead of focusing, and it gives them a bonding activity to do with their parent or their caregiver, and exposing them to maybe a field they never would have been exposed to. So we've heard really great feedback from those struggling on the mental health side or those on the foster side as well.
That's great. Wonderful resources. And I know after we end the session today, there might be folks that think of extra questions, right after we get off the webinar. If that's the case, please feel free to email those to me, and I'm happy to pass those along to both Stephen and Allie and make sure we get your questions answered. So as we have reached the top of the hour, I just want to thank everyone again for joining us, and many, many thanks to Stephen and Allie for sharing their expertise with us. And just before we end, I want to remind everyone that OMA has several resource lists available at ohiomuseums.org, including guidelines from the state of Ohio, as well as other COVID-related resources that might be helpful for museums. And those are available at ohiomuseums.org. And in Ohio, coronavirus.ohio.gov is the state website for more information, guidelines, and public health orders. We hope that you can join OMA for our December webinar, which is Meaningful Frontline Staff Management and Engagement, which is happening December 14th at 10 a.m., and that will be presented by our friends at the Visitor Experience Group. You can learn more and register for the webinar, as well as see a list of all of our upcoming OMA events at ohiomuseums.org. So thank you again for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and take care. Goodbye.
Thank you.